Now let me write the script directly. This is a text deliverable, no file creation needed, based on the output format requested. Title: Sweden's 10-minute trap destroys Putin's air dominance. Script: what if the weapon that finally breaks Russia's grip on the sky fits on a highway and takes just 10 minutes to reload? That question alone should make you stop, because what Sweden just handed Ukraine isn't just a fighter jet, it's a trap, and Putin never saw it coming. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who wants to understand what's really happening in this war beyond the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And if this video teaches you something new, drop a like. It keeps content like this alive. Now let's get into it. For months, Russia built its war around one brutal truth: control the sky, and you control everything beneath it. Power stations went dark. Water systems failed. Apartment buildings collapsed into rubble. The strategy was deliberate and calculated: break Ukraine's infrastructure, shatter civilian morale, and force a surrender that bullets alone couldn't achieve. Russia didn't just want military victory, it wanted psychological collapse, and for a long time Ukraine had no real answer to that. But on May 28th, something changed at Uppsala Air Base in Sweden. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stood beside Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. The two men were not there for a photo opportunity. They were there to announce one of the most significant military commitments from a Western nation since the war began. 16 JAS-39 Gripen C/D fighters would be transferred directly to Ukraine. An additional 20 next-generation Gripen E aircraft would be acquired through a €2.5 billion financing arrangement backed by the European Union. Zelensky didn't hold back. He said Ukraine hopes to eventually receive all 150 aircraft. Kristersson called it historic. Zelensky called it a turning point. But here's what neither man said out loud, and what you need to understand. This isn't just about adding aircraft to Ukraine's fleet. This is about targeting something very specific. Russia's air power relies on three distinct advantages that have kept it dominant since the war began. The Gripen was built piece by piece to destroy each one. Let's start with the first advantage Russia holds: range. The ability to engage from a distance before the enemy can respond. Ukraine's F-16 fighters currently carry AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles. These are strong, proven weapons. Their effective engagement range sits somewhere between 100 and 160 kilometers, depending on altitude and conditions. Russia's Su-35 fighters carry comparable missiles and operate within a similar envelope. In practice, neither side has a dominant edge in pure reach. The sky above eastern Ukraine has become a tense standoff, two forces circling each other at the edge of their missile ranges. Now enter the MBDA Meteor. This is the missile the Gripen can carry, and it doesn't just extend Ukraine's reach, it fundamentally changes the rules of engagement in the air. Conventional air-to-air missiles work in a simple way. They ignite, burn their fuel quickly, and then coast toward the target. As they lose energy, they also lose the ability to maneuver. A skilled pilot who sees the missile coming has a window, a brief but real opportunity to turn hard, drop countermeasures, and break the shot. Meteor doesn't work that way. It uses a ramjet engine. That means it doesn't burn its fuel in one initial burst. It sustains thrust across most of its flight path. It arrives at the target still fast, still maneuverable, still dangerous. The result is what weapons analysts call a dramatically larger no-escape zone, the area from which a target aircraft simply cannot run. At estimated effective engagement ranges between 150 and 200 kilometers, the Meteor doesn't just match Russia's missiles, it surpasses them, and because it retains energy all the way to impact, the math changes for Russian pilots at a gut level. The moment a Gripen armed with Meteor enters the battle space, a Su-35 pilot can no longer feel safe at any distance that used to seem comfortable. Think about what that means in practice. Russian Su-34 strike aircraft, the planes doing much of the bombing, would have to launch their weapons from farther away. Greater distance means reduced accuracy. It means less time on target. It means more of the bombs fall where they shouldn't, or miss entirely. And Russian Su-35 fighter escorts, whose job is to protect those strike aircraft, would be pushed back. The coverage they provide shrinks. The window Russia has to conduct effective air operations narrows. The International Institute for Strategic Studies has described Meteor as one of the most capable air-to-air missiles currently deployed on Western combat aircraft. That's not marketing language. That's an assessment from one of the most respected defense research organizations in the world. But Meteor isn't the only threat the Gripen brings. It can also carry Storm Shadow cruise missiles, combat-proven weapons capable of striking hardened command centers, underground bunkers, and logistics nodes with precision. Armed with precision-guided munitions, the Gripen can reach fuel depots, ammunition stores, and forward supply routes deep behind Russian lines. Russia has enjoyed a certain comfort in knowing its rear areas are relatively safe. That comfort would not survive the arrival of these aircraft. And here's something that rarely gets mentioned in the coverage of this announcement. The Gripen has already met Russian aircraft in the real world. On September 19, 2025, 3 Russian MiG-31 interceptors entered Estonian airspace near Vaindloo Island. They were flying without active transponders, no filed flight plan, no identification. NATO scrambled aircraft. Italian F-35s responded as part of the Baltic air policing mission. Sweden and Finland launched their own jets. One of the photographs released after the encounter came directly from the Swedish Air Force. That means a Gripen had already made visual contact with Russian aircraft in a live situation. No missiles were fired, but the message was clear. Swedish pilots have genuine recent experience tracking and intercepting the exact types of aircraft Ukraine faces every day over its own territory. And those same pilots are expected to train Ukrainian aviators on the Gripen. That knowledge transfer isn't a footnote. It may be one of the most strategically valuable parts of this entire deal. Now you're probably thinking, if these jets are so capable, Russia will just do what it always does. Find the airfields, hit them before the planes can get off the ground, destroy the infrastructure, end the threat before it begins. And that brings us to Russia's second advantage, the one that has worked consistently since the war began, the ability to target fixed infrastructure. Runways can be cratered, hangars can be destroyed, maintenance equipment can be hit. A fighter jet that cannot take off is just an expensive piece of metal sitting in the open. Russia has used this logic effectively against Ukraine's air assets since the very first days of the invasion. But the Gripen was designed by people who thought about exactly this scenario 40 years before this war began. In the early 1980s, Swedish defense planners were running a nightmare calculation. If war broke out with the Soviet Union, the opening hours would look like this. Soviet missiles would target every major Swedish airbase simultaneously. The runways would be gone. The hangars would be burning. Sweden's air force would be destroyed on the ground before it could respond. Sweden's answer was not to build better bunkers or more hardened shelters. Sweden decided to build a jet that didn't need an airbase at all. That decision became the foundation of what Sweden calls the BAS 90 doctrine, and it shaped every single aspect of how the Gripen was designed. The Gripen can take off from a standard highway stretch of roughly 800 meters. No air traffic control tower required. No support vehicles needed that couldn't fit on a road. The ground crew required to service and rearm the aircraft is small. In some configurations, just a handful of technicians. And the turnaround time, from landing to refueled, rearmed, and back in the air, 10 minutes. Let that sit for a moment. 10 minutes. For comparison, many conventional fighters require significantly longer support cycles to return to combat readiness. The logistics chains, the equipment, the procedures, they all take time. Time that, in a contested environment, might mean the difference between survival and destruction. The Gripen's philosophy is fundamentally different. Don't let the enemy know where your aircraft are. Don't stay in one place long enough to be targeted. Land on a road outside a small town, refuel from a truck, rearm from a prepositioned supply cache, take off again from a different stretch of road 20 kilometers away. Russia's missiles cannot target what Russia cannot find. Now, you've been patient. You've stayed with this. And what you're about to hear next is where it all comes together. Because we've been building towards something, a picture of what this aircraft, this missile system, and this doctrine mean when you combine them. Hey, before we get to the final piece, if you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding this conflict on a deeper level. Most people won't. Do me a favor, tap the share button and send this to one other person who would want to know this. Not for views, just because this kind of analysis deserves more than the algorithm gives it. Now let's finish this. Russia's third and most psychologically powerful advantage in this war has been asymmetry. Russia can strike deep. Russia can hit Ukrainian cities, energy plants, and civilian infrastructure from hundreds of kilometers away. But Ukraine has been largely unable to return that pressure at scale. The threat has flowed in one direction. That asymmetry has shaped the entire political and military dynamic of the war. It's why Russian commanders have felt a certain confidence even when ground operations stall. They could always punish Ukraine from a distance, and Ukraine could not answer in kind. The Gripen, armed with Storm Shadow missiles, begins to close that gap in ways that matter, not just militarily, but strategically. When a nation feels that its own rear areas are exposed, military planning changes. Resources that were focused on offense must now be diverted to defense. Air defense systems that were deployed to protect forward positions must be pulled back to protect logistics hubs and command centers. The math of the entire campaign shifts. And the Gripen does something else that often goes overlooked in the conversation about air power. It can carry short-range infrared missiles alongside the Meteor. That means the same aircraft that threatens Russian fighters from 150 kilometers away can also engage low-flying drones and cruise missiles at close range. Russia has built its recent campaign around waves of Shahed drones and cruise missile salvos designed to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. A single platform that can threaten multiple layers of that attack architecture, fighters, cruise missiles, and drones, is not just useful. It's a nightmare for Russian targeting planners. Ukraine has fought this war with remarkable resilience, but with consistent material disadvantage in the air. Western support has arrived in stages, often delayed, always complicated by political caution about escalation. The Gripen announcement is different in one critical way. Sweden isn't hesitating. The commitment is structured, financed, and signed. The training pipeline is being designed now, and Sweden has direct experience operating this aircraft against Russian aircraft in live conditions. Think about the arc of this conflict from Russia's perspective. In February 2022, the expectation was a swift collapse. Ukraine would fold in days. The government would flee. The war would be over before the world could respond. That didn't happen. Then the expectation shifted. Grind Ukraine down through attrition. Destroy its infrastructure. Drain its morale. Make the cost of resistance unbearable. That hasn't worked either. Now Russia faces the prospect of Ukraine operating aircraft capable of genuinely contesting the airspace over eastern Ukraine. Not just surviving in it, not just evading Russian air defenses, but pushing Russian aircraft back, expanding the no-fly zone Russia has to operate in, making every strike mission more expensive and more risky. Putin's air campaign was built on two assumptions that the Gripen directly attacks. First, that Ukraine's air assets could be destroyed on the ground or pushed to the margins. The Gripen's highway operating capability eliminates fixed targets. Second, that Russia's fighters could operate with relative impunity at ranges Ukraine couldn't match. Meteor eliminates that comfort. The 10-minute trap isn't just a tactical feature, it's a strategic statement. It says, you cannot plan around destroying us on the ground. We will not be where you think we are. We will strike, land, rearm, and vanish before your targeting data is even processed. Sweden spent decades refining that doctrine against the Soviet military threat. The pilots and engineers who designed the Bas-90 concept were thinking about how to survive the opening hours of a Soviet first strike. They built a jet for exactly the kind of war Ukraine is fighting right now, not in theory, in practice. There are real questions still on the table. The timeline for delivery and pilot training is significant. Moving from zero Gripen experience to combat-ready operations takes time. Integration of weapon systems, maintenance chains, and spare parts supply all require coordination, and Russia will attempt to adapt. It always does. The history of this war is a history of move and counter-move, advantage and counter-advantage. But here is what is not in question. The strategic direction has shifted. Sweden joining this fight, not as a distant donor writing checks, but as a technical and operational partner training pilots, transferring aircraft and sharing real-world intercept experience against Russian jets, represents something genuinely new. Zelensky's stated ambition of 150 Gripens was not casual. If even a fraction of that number reaches operational status over the coming years, the air war above Ukraine will look fundamentally different from the one Russia planned for. A fleet of highway-based, Meteor-armed, Storm Shadow-capable strike fighters operated by pilots trained alongside aviators who have already faced Russian aircraft is not a defensive capability. It is a deterrent, and in some scenarios, it becomes something more. Russia built its dominance in this war on a simple premise. It could reach everything, and nothing could adequately reach back. The Gripen, the Meteor missile, and the Bas-90 doctrine together form a direct challenge to every part of that premise. The sky above Ukraine is about to get a lot more complicated for Russia, and that complication was built in a Swedish design studio 40 years ago, waiting for exactly this moment. Here's the question worth sitting with after everything you've just heard. We've watched this war shift at critical moments when a new weapon or a new alliance partner changed the math entirely. The Javelin, the HIMARS, the F-16. Each one was called decisive at the time. Each one was important, but not sufficient alone. Is the Gripen the same, one more piece in an unfinished puzzle, or is this different? Is this the piece that finally changes the structure of the puzzle itself? You've spent the last several minutes thinking harder about this war than most people will today. That matters. If this gave you a clearer picture, if it raised questions you didn't have before, then this video did what it was supposed to do. Pin a comment below. Tell me what you think the next strategic shift in this war will be. The best analysis I've seen in comments always comes from people who watch to the end. So let me know where you think this goes. The conversation continues down there.